McKinley County, New Mexico. August 1961. The coyote problem in the Blue Water Wash District began, by most accounts, in the first week of August 1961, although a few older residents later admitted they had noticed small irregularities as early as that spring. By the time the county trapper resigned his post on August 17th, an estimated 60 to 80 coyotes had been seen acting in ways no coyote should act. The family of a missing sheepherder had been run out of its home by sounds coming from the brush, and something had been found inside a den that 3 men who saw it still refused to describe on the record. The wash itself, a dry tributary of the Puerco River, east of the Arizona line, was quietly removed from Bureau of Land Management grazing maps in 1965 and has not been leased since. I began working on this account in the autumn of 1972, after a retired McKinley County livestock inspector mentioned the Blue Water Wash incident during a bar conversation in Gallup, then stopped talking the moment he realized I was a journalist. Over the following 8 months, I located and interviewed 14 individuals connected to the case, reviewed the incomplete sheriff's file, and twice visited the site, which is accessible today only by a rutted track that ends at a barbed wire fence bearing a sign with no words, just a single strip of faded red paint across the top rail. No one I spoke with could tell me who erected the fence, or when, or why the paint was red. The incident centered on the Begay Sheep Camp, a seasonal operation 6 miles south of the Chaco River, managed by a 39-year-old herder named Albert Begay. No direct relation to the Begays of the 1954 Lucashukai case, though the surname is common in the region. Albert Begay lived at the camp with his wife, Elsie, their 12-year-old daughter, Irene, and a hired hand named Raymond Peshlakai, 22. The camp consisted of a stone hogan, a canvas supply tent, a pole corral, and approximately 200 Navajo churro sheep that grazed the sparse grama grass of the wash bottom. On August 3, 1961, Albert Begay rode 12 miles to the trading post at Pueblo Pintado and reported to the postmaster, a man named Clifford Nakai, that something was wrong with the coyotes. Nakai later gave a sworn statement to Deputy Vernon Key of the McKinley County Sheriff's Office. According to Nakai, Begay said the coyotes had been singing every night for a week, which was not unusual in itself, but that the singing had started to sound like human speech. Begay said he could not make out words, but that the cadence was wrong for coyote music. The yips and howls were too regular, too patterned, as though the animals were practicing a language they almost knew. Nakai told Begay he was letting the isolation get to him and sold him a sack of flour and a tin of coffee. On August 5th, Elsie Begay woke at approximately 2:00 a.m. to the sound of her daughter speaking in her sleep. Irene, who slept in a cot against the hogan's east wall, was repeating a phrase in Navajo that Elsie later translated for Deputy Key as, "He says he is walking. He says he is walking from the west." Elsie woke the girl, who had no memory of the dream. The coyotes outside were silent. The following afternoon, Irene Begay walked to the wash to collect water from the seep that supplied the camp. She did not return. Albert and Raymond Peshlakai searched for her along the wash bottom and found her water bucket, still full, sitting on a flat rock at the seep's edge. Next to the bucket was a single coyote track in the mud, larger than normal, with the front claws splayed unusually wide. Albert Begay followed the track. It walked east along the wash for approximately 40 yards and then stopped in the center of a patch of bare sand, as though the animal had simply ceased to exist. There were no other tracks. Albert rode to Pueblo Pintado and telephoned the sheriff's office in Gallup. Deputy Vernon Key arrived at the camp at 8:30 p.m. with a volunteer search party of 6 men from the area. They found Irene Begay at 10:15 p.m., seated in the sand at the bottom of the side arroyo, half a mile from the camp. She was unharmed. She was awake. She was holding a dead coyote pup in her lap, wrapped in a scrap of calico cloth that Elsie later identified as having come from the family's supply tent. The pup was still warm. Irene told the searchers that the man who walks on four legs had led her to the arroyo and told her to wait with the pup until someone came. She said the man had worn a coyote skin over his shoulders and had spoken to her without moving his mouth. She said his eyes were the color of the sunrise and that his teeth were too long for his jaw. She was not afraid. She asked if she could keep the pup. The pup was taken into evidence and later died at the County Animal Control Facility in Gallup on August 7th. The veterinarian who performed the necropsy, Dr. Harold Shee, noted in his report that the pup's stomach contained fragments of human hair and a small copper button of the type used on denim trousers. The button was never matched to any missing person. The hair was determined to be from a child, age indeterminate. The report is filed with the case. On August 10th, Deputy Key returned to the wash with the county trapper, a man named Lawrence Billy. Billy was a 30-year veteran, a Navajo man from Tohatchi who had trapped coyotes since boyhood and was known for his ability to read sign. He walked the wash for 3 hours, visiting the seep, the arroyo, and the spot where the track had vanished. At 1:00 p.m., he returned to Deputy Key and stated that he was resigning his position, effective immediately. He refused to explain why. Deputy Key recorded the resignation in his report. I located Lawrence Billy's nephew in 1973 and asked if his uncle had ever spoken about that day. The nephew said his uncle had told his wife only one thing, that the coyote dens in the wash had been dug too deep 8 feet or more, and that at the bottom of each one he had found a small round stone worn smooth, arranged in a circle of 13. He said his uncle had not touched the stones. He said his uncle never trapped again. Lawrence Billy died in 1968. A significant discovery was made on August 12th by 2 Bureau of Indian Affairs Range Management officers, Joseph Yazzie and Robert Platero, who had been asked by the sheriff's office to survey the wash for additional sign. The 2 men entered a side canyon approximately 1 mile east of the Begay camp and located a cluster of 5 coyote dens cut into the arroyo bank. The dens were larger than typical, with entrances approximately 2 feet wide. Platero, who is still living and who agreed to speak with me only after I promised not to record the conversation, told me that he crawled into the largest den on his stomach with a flashlight and found, at the back of the tunnel, a chamber approximately 4 feet in diameter. Inside the chamber, he found the following: a child's leather shoe, left foot, size approximately a toddler's 4, filled with dried corn kernels, a braid of dark human hair tied with a strip of blue wool yarn, and a section of human jawbone, mandible only, with 3 molars still intact. The jawbone was adult in size. The molars had been filed to points. Platero backed out of the den, vomited, and told Yazzie what he had seen. The 2 men marked the location and returned to the sheriff's office. The items were collected the following day by Deputy Key and a forensics officer from the state police in Santa Fe. The jawbone was examined by the New Mexico State Medical Examiner, Dr. Francis Ortega, who concluded that the filing had been done post-mortem with a rough metal tool. The shoe was estimated to date from the 1940s. The corn was contemporary. The hair braid matched no DNA profile in the limited state database of the era and was stored in the evidence annex, where it remains. The Begay family left the sheep camp on August 14th. Albert Begay told Deputy Key that they would not be returning. He said the sheep had been behaving strangely since the night of Irene's disappearance, standing in tight circles in the corral, all facing inward, refusing to move for hours at a stretch. He said he did not intend to take the sheep with him. Deputy Key arranged for the animals to be sold at auction in Gallup. The buyer, a commercial operation near Las Cruces, later reported that the sheep were unmanageable and that they had been sold again to a rendering plant in Texas within 3 months. The rendering plant has no record of the transaction. The incident that ended the public investigation occurred on August 17th. On that morning, a ranch hand named Emmett Charlie, employed by a neighboring grazing operation, was riding the fence line along the northern boundary of the Begay camp when he saw what he first thought was a dog lying in the shade of a juniper tree. He rode closer and saw that it was a large coyote, male, gray phase, lying on its side. It was alive. It was watching him. It did not move as he approached. Emmett Charlie dismounted and walked to within 10 feet of the animal. He later told Deputy Key that the coyote made a sound he could not describe, a sequence of syllables that were not animal. He said the sound resolved into something that sounded like his own name, spoken in his late grandmother's voice, clear as a bell. He said the coyote's mouth did not match the sounds. He said he fired his rifle into the animal's chest from a distance of 6 feet. The coyote died instantly. The body was transported to the county animal control facility in Gallup for examination. Dr. Harold Chi conducted the necropsy on the afternoon of August 17th. He found that the coyote was a normal adult male, approximately 3 years old, in good physical condition. He found no anomalies in the brain or cranial structure. He found that the animal's vocal cords had been surgically altered in a manner that Dr. Chi described in his report as consistent with human medical intervention. The cords had been shortened and reattached with sutures made of human hair. Dr. Chi stated that the procedure would have required a skilled surgeon operating on a live, anesthetized animal. No evidence of sedation was found in the tissue. No veterinarian in New Mexico or Arizona reported performing any such procedure. The sutures were determined to be decades old, taken from a head whose owner was never identified. The body of the coyote was incinerated at the county facility on August 18th. The ashes were disposed of in an unmarked pit on county property. The location is not recorded. The McKinley County Sheriff's Office officially suspended the investigation on September 1st, 1961, citing lack of leads. The file was moved to closed storage in 1965. The items collected: the jawbone, the shoe, the corn, the braid, the calico cloth, the button, and the necropsy report remain in the County Evidence Annex in Gallup, boxed together under the label Blue Water Wash, evidence only. The box has not been opened since 1966, according to the evidence log. Blue Water Wash itself was quietly removed from BLM maps in 1965. The access road washed out in a flash flood the following year and was never rebuilt. Local residents refer to the area as May Begin Coyote's home and do not take livestock there. The red fence still stands. No one will say who put it up. Irene Begay, now 34 and living under a married name in a town I agreed not to name, spoke with me for 20 minutes in the spring of 1973. She told me she remembers the man who led her into the arroyo. She said he was kind. She said his voice was like a song she almost knew. She said the coyote pup in her lap had breathed in time with her own heartbeat, and that she had felt, for the hour and a half she sat in the dark, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She said she sometimes dreams of the man still, walking the wash with his coyote skin trailing in the sand, and that in the dreams he turns and looks at her as she wakes because she wants to follow him and knows she cannot. She said she has never told anyone the thing the man said to her before he left her in the arroyo. She said she will not tell me. She asked me to leave her house. I did. Standing Rock, New Mexico, on the night of March 14, 1961, a Navajo Nation police officer conducted a routine traffic stop on New Mexico State Route 59, a narrow paved road connecting Standing Rock to Crown Point. The stop, which began at 11:28 p.m., became one of the most heavily documented and least understood law enforcement incidents in county history. The officer resigned 3 days later. The driver he stopped was never located, and the recording of the radio traffic that night has never been released in full. Officer Raymond Vicente, 34, a 4-year veteran of the Navajo Nation Police based out of the Crown Point substation, was patrolling eastbound on Route 59 when he observed a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air traveling westbound at a speed he estimated at 75 miles per hour. The posted limit was 55. Officer Biscinti activated his lights and executed a U-turn. The Bel Air did not accelerate. It pulled over immediately, coasting onto the gravel shoulder with what Officer Biscinti later described as unusual precision. The vehicle stopped exactly 3 feet from the edge of the pavement. Officer Biscinti radioed his position at 11:28. He reported a single-occupant vehicle, male driver, no visible plates. He approached the driver's side window. The driver was a Caucasian male, approximately 40 to 50 years old, with deeply weathered skin and dark hair. He was wearing a denim jacket and a plain white shirt. His hands were placed on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. He was smiling. Officer Biscinti informed the driver he had been traveling at an unsafe speed. The driver nodded. He did not produce a license or registration. He continued to smile. Officer Biscinti asked the driver to state his name. According to Officer Biscinti's official report, the driver said, "I'm not the one you're looking for." Officer Biscinti asked the driver what he meant. The driver said, "I'm ahead of you." Officer Biscinti asked the driver to clarify. The driver said, "You haven't caught up yet." At this point, according to Officer Biscinti's report, the driver's smile changed in a manner that I cannot describe. Officer Biscinti stated that the driver's mouth did not move, but the expression became entirely different, as though another person was using the same face. Officer Biscinti drew his service weapon and ordered the driver to exit the vehicle. The driver complied. He stepped out of the Bel Air and stood on the shoulder of Route 59. He was, by Officer Biscinti's estimate, approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall. His arms appeared proportionally too long for his body. His fingers extended past his knees. Officer Biscinti ordered the man to place his hands on the roof of the patrol car. The man did not move. Instead, he said, "You can follow me if you want, but you should know where I'm going first." Officer Biscinti asked where he was going. The man pointed west toward the Chusca Mountains. He said, "I already got there, 40 minutes from now. You should come see." Officer Biscinti told the man to turn around and place his hands behind his back. The man smiled again. Officer Biscinti later testified that the man said something in a language I did not recognize, then turned and began walking into the desert. Officer Biscinti ordered him to stop. The man did not stop. Officer Biscinti fired a warning shot into the ground. The man did not react. He continued walking at a steady pace, directly away from the road, into complete darkness. Officer Biscinti did not pursue on foot. He returned to his patrol car and radioed for assistance at 11:34 p.m. Backup arrived at 11:51 p.m. 2 additional Navajo Nation police units and a McKinley County Sheriff's deputy. The officers searched the area with flashlights and spotlights. They found footprints leading away from the road for approximately 200 yards. The footprints then stopped. The terrain beyond that point was undisturbed. At 12:10 a.m., the search was interrupted by a radio call from the Crown Point dispatcher. A resident of Standing Rock, a sheep rancher named Martin Baca, had called to report that a man matching the suspect's description was standing in his livestock pen, approximately 14 miles west of the traffic stop location. The call had been placed at 11:48 p.m. Officer Biscinti later calculated the distance and time. 14 miles in 14 minutes, over rough desert terrain with no vehicle, in complete darkness. The pace would require a running speed of 60 miles per hour, sustained over uneven ground. A unit was dispatched to the Baca residence. The responding officer, Deputy Robert Corres of the McKinley County Sheriff's Office, arrived at 12:28 a.m. He found Martin Baca, his wife, and their 2 adult sons standing in the yard of the ranch house, all 4 holding rifles. The livestock pen was empty. All 17 of the family's sheep were gone. The gate was still latched from the inside. There were no tracks leading in or out of the pen. The family had been watching the pen since the initial sighting. No one had seen the sheep leave. Deputy Corris conducted a sweep of the property. Behind the barn, he found one sheep. It was alive, standing motionless, facing the wall of the barn. It did not respond to light, sound, or physical contact. When Deputy Corris attempted to pull the sheep away from the wall, it resisted with strength disproportionate to its size, and then collapsed. The animal was later examined by a veterinarian in Gallup. The vet's report noted complete atrophy of all 4 limb muscles, consistent with weeks of immobilization, despite the Baca family's testimony that the sheep had been healthy and mobile earlier that day. The remaining 16 sheep were never recovered. At 1:45 a.m., Officer Biscenti was stationed at a roadblock on Route 59, approximately 4 miles east of the original traffic stop. He was accompanied by Deputy Corris, who had returned from the Baca Ranch. Both men were standing outside their vehicles when a 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, matching the description of the abandoned vehicle, approached the roadblock from the west. The vehicle was traveling at approximately 20 miles per hour. It stopped 50 feet from the roadblock. The headlights remained on. No one exited the vehicle. Deputy Corris approached the driver's side with his weapon drawn. He ordered the driver to turn off the engine and show his hands. The engine turned off. The driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. He was a Navajo male, approximately 30 years old, wearing civilian clothing. He was visibly terrified. His hands were shaking. He was bleeding from a wound on his right forearm. The man identified himself as Franklin Sinigini, a resident of Crown Point. He stated that he had been driving home from Gallup at approximately 10:30 p.m. when he pulled over to check a mechanical issue near the intersection of Route 59 and a county access road. While he was examining his engine, a Caucasian male in a denim jacket approached him on foot and asked for a ride. Mr. Sinigini stated that he did not want to give this man a ride. He got back in his car and locked the doors. The man placed one hand on the driver's side window and the glass shattered. Mr. Sinigini stated the man then pulled me out of the car like I weighed nothing and threw him into the ditch. The man got in the car and drove away. Mr. Sinigini walked approximately 3 miles to a ranch house and called the police. While he was waiting for officers to arrive, he looked out the window and saw his own car parked in the ranch yard, engine running, driver's door open. The man in the denim jacket was standing next to the car, looking at the ranch house. He appeared to be waiting. Mr. Sinigini barricaded himself in the bathroom. He heard the front door open. He heard footsteps in the hallway. The footsteps stopped directly outside the bathroom door. A voice said, "I don't need you yet. I need him. Tell him I'm still ahead." The footsteps retreated. The front door closed. Mr. Sinigini waited 20 minutes before leaving the bathroom. His car was gone. The ranch house was empty. The family was visiting relatives in Albuquerque. Mr. Sinigini used the ranch phone to call his brother, who drove him to the roadblock, where he encountered Officer Biscenti and Deputy Corris. Mr. Sinigini's wound was treated at Crown Point Hospital. A fragment of window glass was removed from his forearm. He was interviewed by 3 separate investigators. His account did not change. At 3:22 a.m., the Crown Point dispatcher received a call from Officer Biscenti's patrol car radio. The transmission was brief. Officer Biscenti's voice was strained but controlled. He stated, "I am in pursuit of the suspect vehicle westbound on 59 toward the Chuska Range. The driver is the man I stopped. He is alone. I am requesting." The transmission cut off. It was followed by approximately 8 seconds of open-channel audio. The dispatcher described the sound as a voice speaking in a language I did not understand, at a speed that did not seem possible, followed by a single sharp noise. It was either a gunshot or a vehicle backfire. Officer Biscenti did not respond to further radio calls. His patrol car was located at 5:40 a.m., parked at a scenic overlook on the eastern approach to the Chuska Mountains. The engine was cold. The driver's side door was open. Officer Biscenti's uniform was folded neatly on the driver's seat. His badge was placed on top of the uniform. His service weapon was in its holster. All 6 rounds were accounted for. Officer Biscenti's personal vehicle, a 1955 Ford pickup, was found abandoned at his residence in Crown Point later that morning. The keys were in the ignition. The front door of his house was unlocked. A suitcase was packed on his bed. A handwritten note on the kitchen table read, "I can't be behind him anymore. I have to get ahead." Officer Biscenti was officially listed as a missing person on March 18, 1961. The investigation remained open until 1971, when it was reclassified as inactive. His body was never found. The 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air was never located. The identity of the driver was never established. The McKinley County Sheriff's Office investigation file, declassified in 1979, contains 204 pages of interviews, forensic reports, and handwritten notes. The final page is a memo from the lead investigator, Sheriff's Captain David Montoya, dated September 3, 1962. It reads, "I am unable to determine what happened. I am unable to determine if a crime occurred. I recommend that this file be sealed and that no officer patrol Route 59 alone after dark." That recommendation became unofficial policy. For nearly 2 decades, Navajo Nation police officers assigned to the Crown Point substation were warned, informally, not to conduct solo patrols on the western stretch of Route 59 between midnight and dawn. The warnings were never written down. They were passed from senior officers to rookies in the parking lot, out of earshot of command staff. The scenic overlook where Officer Biscenti's patrol car was found has been officially closed since 1974. The guardrail was removed. The access road was graded over. The State Highway Department cited erosion concerns. Local residents note that no other overlook on Route 59 was closed for erosion. Franklin Sinagini left Crown Point in 1963 and moved to Phoenix. He died in 1988. According to his daughter, he never drove on Route 59 again, and he did not permit anyone in his family to drive it after dark. When asked why, he said only, "He's still out there. He's still ahead of someone." Apache County, Arizona, November 1965. The dog appeared at the Jim family homestead at Mexican Water on the afternoon of November 2, 1965. It was a medium-sized animal, shepherd type, black with a white chest and 1 white forepaw. It walked up the dirt track from the highway as though it knew exactly where it was going, crossed the yard, and lay down on the threshold of the hogan, where Mary Jim, 71, was sitting in the doorway, shelling corn. It placed its head on its paws and sighed, the way old dogs do, and closed its eyes. Mary Jim, who had lived on that homestead for 53 years and had known many dogs, said the animal behaved as though it had lived there all its life. The family assumed the dog was a stray. They fed it scraps from the evening meal. It ate politely, without begging. It did not approach the sheep pen. It did not bark at the horses. It slept on the threshold, and in the morning it was still there, watching the eastern horizon, waiting for the sun. The Jim family, Mary, her husband Harrison, 74, their son David, 42, and David's wife, Clara, 35, accepted the dog's presence without much discussion. A good dog was useful on a sheep camp. This one seemed quiet and steady and not inclined to trouble. The dog was not a dog. The first indication that something was wrong came on the morning of November 5th. David Jim had risen early to check on the sheep and found the dog already in the corral, sitting in the center of the flock. The sheep were not alarmed. They had formed a circle around the dog. all facing inward, motionless. David called the dog. It stood, walked through the flock, and followed him back to the hogan. David mentioned the behavior to his father, who shrugged and said some dogs were strange with stock. That evening, Clara Jim noticed that the dog was watching her daughter. The daughter, Louise, was 6 years old. She was playing in the yard with a cornhusk doll, singing to it in Navajo. The dog was lying on the threshold, its head on its paws, its eyes following Louise with an attention that Clara later described as not hungry and not protective something else. She called Louise inside. The dog did not move. It watched the door for an hour after the family was in bed. On November 7th, Mary Jim woke in the night to the sound of someone speaking her name. The voice was her mother's voice, her mother Rose, who had died in 1932 and who was buried in the family plot 2 miles north. The voice said, "Mary, look at the dog." Mary sat up in her bed. The hogan was dark. The fire had burned down to coals. She could see the door, which was open a crack, and through the crack she could see the dog, which was standing on the threshold, facing into the hogan. The dog was looking at her. The dog's eyes, in the dim light, were not a dog's eyes. They were pale and oval and oriented forward, like a person's. Mary Jim was not a woman easily frightened. She had raised 6 children on that homestead. She had weathered droughts and blizzards and the loss of a son in Korea. She had known medicine men and heard the old stories and understood that some things existed beyond easy explanation. She lay back down and closed her eyes and did not open them until morning. The following day, she told her husband that the dog needed to leave. Harrison Jim asked why. Mary told him what she had seen. Harrison, who had been married to Mary for 51 years and had learned to trust her judgment absolutely, agreed to take the dog to the animal shelter in Chittle. He called the dog. It came to him immediately, wagging its tail, and jumped into the bed of the pickup without resistance. Harrison drove to Chittle, a distance of 40 miles, and delivered the dog to the shelter. The shelter attendant, a man named Robert Baya, signed the intake form. The dog was placed in a kennel. Harrison drove home. At dusk, the dog was back on the threshold. Harrison telephoned the shelter. Robert Baya told him the kennel was empty. The gate was still latched. The chain link was intact. The dog was gone. Harrison hung up and did not call again. On the night of November 10th, David Jim woke to find his daughter, Louise, standing beside his bed. She was awake, but not speaking. He asked her what was wrong. She did not answer. He reached for her hand, and she spoke, but the voice was not her voice. It was a man's voice, low and rough and speaking in Navajo with an accent that David later told the sheriff's office was old-fashioned, like my grandfather's generation. The voice said, "I am almost finished. Do not interfere. The girl will not be harmed." David scrambled out of bed. Louise's eyes were open, but the pupils were not moving. They were fixed and dilated, and did not track when he moved his hand in front of her face. He shouted for Clara. Clara woke, saw their daughter, and ran to get Mary. By the time Mary arrived, Louise was blinking and crying, and asking why everyone was standing around her in the dark. She had no memory of getting out of bed. She had no memory of speaking. Outside the hogan, on the threshold, the dog was lying with its head on its paws, watching the door. The family drove to the trading post at Red Mesa and telephoned the Apache County Sheriff's Office in St. John's. 2 deputies arrived at the homestead at 2 o'clock. Curtis Yazzie and Robert Platero. They interviewed the family separately. They examined Louise, who was now sleeping normally. They examined the dog, which was still on the threshold, still calm, still wagging its tail when approached. Deputy Yazzie, a 15-year veteran who had worked livestock cases and domestic disputes, but nothing like this, later wrote in his report that the dog appears entirely normal, but that he could not maintain eye contact with the animal for more than a few seconds without experiencing a sensation of cognitive disorientation. I asked him what that meant when I interviewed him in 1975. He said, "It means I looked at the dog and forgot what I was thinking." The deputies searched the yard, the corral, and the surrounding brush. They found nothing unusual except for a single item resting on the threshold of the sheep pen. A small leather pouch, old, filled with dried corn pollen and a lock of dark human hair. The pouch was not the Jim family's. No one recognized it. Deputy Yazzie bagged it as evidence. At dawn, the deputies prepared to leave. Deputy Platero suggested they take the dog with them. Deputy Yazzie agreed. They called the dog. It did not move. They approached it. It did not move. Deputy Platero reached for its collar, and the dog made a sound that Deputy Yazzie described in his report as a human voice articulating a word of refusal. The word was in Navajo. Deputy Yazzie wrote it down phonetically. I showed the phonetic transcription to a Navajo linguist at the University of Arizona. He identified the word as an archaic form of the negative imperative, way of saying "do not," that had fallen out of common usage by the 1930s. The deputies left the dog and drove back to St. John's. The pouch was placed in evidence. The case file was opened. On November 13th, Harrison Jim drove to the home of a medicine man named Jonas Begay, who lived near Rock Point. Begay was known for handling difficult cases where the standard ceremonies did not suffice. Harrison told Begay what had happened. Begay listened without comment. Then he told Harrison that the dog was not a dog. He said it was a Yee-Naud Lucy who had taken a shape it could hold for a long time, and that it had been drawn to the Jim family not by chance, but by connection, something in the family's history, something buried or forgotten. He asked Harrison if anyone in the family had ever made a promise to someone who died. Harrison said he did not know. Begay told him to find out. Harrison returned home and asked Mary. Mary was silent for a long time. Then she told him something she had never told anyone. In 1931, a year before her mother Rose died, Rose had asked Mary to take care of her younger brother, a boy named Wilson, who was then 12 years old. Wilson was sickly, mentally slow, and had been born with a deformity of the spine that made him walk hunched over. Mary had promised her mother she would care for him. After her mother's death in 1932, Mary had tried to keep the promise, but Wilson was difficult, prone to rages, prone to wandering, prone to saying things that frightened the other children. In 1935, when Mary was pregnant with her second child and exhausted, she had asked the Bureau of Indian Affairs social worker to take Wilson away. The Baya had placed him in a boarding school in Phoenix. He had run away in 1937 and had not been seen again. Mary had never told anyone she had asked for him to be removed. She had carried the guilt of her broken promise for 30 years. Harrison drove back to Rock Point and told Jonas Begay what he had learned. Begay nodded. He said the dog was not Wilson. Wilson had died years ago. Begay was certain of this, though he did not explain how he knew. The dog was something that had found Wilson's anger, or the shape of it, or the memory of it, and had worn it to the Jim homestead like a coat. The dog was here because a promise had been broken, and the ground where the promise was made had never been healed. Jonas Begay came to the Jim homestead on November 16th. He conducted a ceremony in the sheep corral, where the dog had first shown interest in the flock. The ceremony lasted from sundown to dawn. At its conclusion, Begay instructed the family to do 3 things. First, they were to bury a lock of their hair at the grave of Rose Jim, Mary's mother, with an offering of corn pollen and a spoken apology for the broken promise. Second, they were to find Wilson's name, which had never been recorded in any family document, and speak it aloud at the grave, acknowledging him as kin. Third, they were to leave the homestead for 1 full cycle of the moon, and not return until the moon was new again. The family did all three things. They buried the hair and the pollen. They spoke the apology. They spoke Wilson's name, which Mary had remembered after 50 years. Wilson Nez, son of Rose, brother of Mary. They packed their belongings and drove to a relative's house near Tuba City and stayed there until the new moon of December. When they returned to Mexican Water, the dog was gone. On the threshold of the hogan, where the dog had slept, there was a single depression in the dust, shaped like the body of an animal. In the center of the depression was the leather pouch that Deputy Yazzie had collected and bagged and stored in the evidence annex in St. John's, 60 miles away. The pouch was empty now. The corn pollen and the hair were gone. Deputy Yazzie, when informed that the pouch had reappeared, drove to the homestead and examined it. He confirmed it was the same pouch. The evidence bag in which he had stored was still in the evidence annex, still sealed, still labeled with the case number. The bag was empty. The Jim family remained at Mexican Water. The homestead is still occupied today. Mary Jim passed away in 1969, Harrison in 1971. David and Clara still live there. Louise is grown now, married, living in Flagstaff. I interviewed her by telephone in January 1976. She told me she does not remember the night she spoke in her great-grandfather's voice. She said she sometimes dreams of a black dog with white paws running across the flats at dawn, and that in the dreams, the dog is carrying something in its mouth, and she knows the something is important, but she cannot remember why. She said the dreams do not frighten her. She said the dog, in the dreams, is smiling. The leather pouch is in the possession of the Jim family. The evidence bag is still in the annex, still empty. The case file is classified as closed, resolved informally. The dog has not been seen again. Jonas Begge, the medicine man, died in 1973. Before his death, he told his nephew that the incident at Mexican Water had been one of the most difficult of his career. He said the dog was not evil, exactly. He said it was something that had been called into being by an unkept promise, and that had stayed patiently for 30 years, waiting for the promise to be honored. He said the dog had come not to hurt the family, but to remind them of a debt they did not know they owed. He said the shape it took a dog was not a disguise. It was a gift. A dog is loyal. A dog waits. A dog remembers its duty, even when its master has forgotten. He said that once the apology was made and the name was spoken, the dog had no reason to stay. But he said the dog had not been destroyed. It had simply moved on, looking, perhaps, for another promise that had been broken, another debt that needed to be paid. He said there were many such promises, and that the dog would not run out of work for a very long time. He said the dog had been, in its own way, a faithful servant. He said he hoped it found what it was looking for. He said he was not sure the world had enough corn pollen to heal all the promises that had been broken, but he said the dog would try. He said that was the thing about dogs. They keep trying. Apache County, Arizona, March 1963. The weaving shed behind the Maryboy family hogan at Wheatfields was not remarkable. It was a simple pole and tarpaulin structure, open on the south side to admit light, where Ruth Maryboy, then 41, worked a traditional upright loom. She had learned weaving from her mother and her mother's mother, and the rugs she produced were sold at the trading post in Chinle, and occasionally to collectors who drove the rough road from Ganado. Her work was known for its tight weave and its use of natural browns and grays. No one who bought a Maryboy rug expected anything unusual. That changed in the spring of 1963. By the end of that year, Ruth Maryboy had stopped weaving permanently. Her loom had been dismantled and burned at the direction of a medicine man. The family had abandoned their homestead at Wheatfields and relocated to a relative's property near Kayenta, the clan gathering ground a quarter-mile east a site used for generations for weddings, and that ceremonies had been formally decommissioned by the elders in a private meeting whose minutes were never recorded. and the Navajo Tribal Police had opened and quietly suspended an investigation into what was described in the case file only as disturbances of an unexplained nature involving livestock and personal property. The file remains in the records vault in Window Rock. I reviewed it in 1973. The central exhibit is a weaving, still intact, wrapped in brown paper and stored flat in an evidence box. I was permitted to view it. I have not forgotten what I saw. The Maryboy family consisted of Kenneth Maryboy, 45, a sheepman and occasional laborer for the Baya Road crew, his wife, Ruth, their son, Delbert, 17, and their younger daughter, Lena, 11. They lived at the end of a dirt track east of Wheatfields Lake, in a hogan with an attached frame addition. The sheep corral stood 60 yards north. The weaving shed stood 30 yards south. The clan gathering ground lay beyond a low rise, visible from the shed's entrance. The family was respected. Kenneth's sister, Evelyn, served on the chapter house planning committee. The Maryboys attended the small Presbyterian mission in Chinnell and participated in clan ceremonies according to the seasons. The first sign of trouble came in February 1963, when Lena Maryboy told her mother that she had seen a woman standing at the edge of the clan gathering ground, watching the hogan. Lena described the woman as elderly, wearing a long skirt and a velvet blouse, with her hair tied back in a traditional tsi-il. She said the woman was holding something in her hands, a bundle wrapped in a red cloth. She said the woman had smiled at her, and then walked over the rise and out of sight. When Ruth walked to the gathering ground to investigate, she found no tracks. She found no sign that anyone had been there. She assumed Lena had seen a relative from a distant camp and thought nothing further. In early March, Kenneth Maryboy noticed that the sheep in the corral were behaving oddly. They had stopped facing south during the night, as sheep typically do, and were instead aligning themselves in a single direction, toward the clan gathering ground. Every morning, all 40 sheep were found standing in the same orientation, motionless, their heads pointed east toward the rise. They did not respond to Kenneth's voice until he physically entered the corral and pushed among them. He mentioned the behavior to a neighbor, who suggested the sheep were spooked by a coyote. Kenneth accepted the explanation. The sheep continued this behavior for the remainder of the family's time at Wheatfields. On March 14th, Ruth Maryboy began a new weaving. She had prepared a warp of hand-spun wool in her customary pattern, intending to create a medium-sized rug with a central diamond motif. She worked at the loom for 2 days. On the morning of March 16th, she stepped back to examine her progress and saw that the pattern on the loom was not the pattern she had planned. The weaving depicted a map. The lines of the warp and weft had formed a precise representation of the terrain around Wheatfields, the hogan, the corral, the weaving shed, the rise, the clan gathering ground, and the arroyo that ran east to the lake. The map was accurate in every detail, including landmarks Ruth could not see from the shed and had never consciously noted, such as the exact bend of the arroyo at a point where a particular cottonwood grew. But the map included one feature that did not exist on any map Ruth knew. Beyond the clan gathering ground, set into the side of the rise, the weaving showed a small rectangular structure, a hogan, or perhaps a ceremonial structure with a door facing east. A thread of deep red wool led from the door of the structure to the center of the gathering ground. Ruth called Kenneth to look at the weaving. Kenneth examined it and confirmed that the map was accurate except for the structure on the rise. He walked to the rise. He found nothing. He walked the entire gathering ground. He found no sign of a building, no depression in the earth, no evidence that a structure had ever stood there. He returned to the hogan unsettled. Ruth continued weaving. Over the next 3 days, the map on the loom grew more detailed. The red thread extended from the structure to the gathering ground, and then branched, reaching toward the hogan, the corral, and the weaving shed. New elements appeared. a figure standing at the entrance of the structure, small and dark, woven in black wool. A second figure near the corral. A third figure beside the cottonwood at the arroyo bend. None of the figures had faces. All of them were oriented toward the hogan. On March 20th, Delbert Maryboy woke in the night to the sound of his sister speaking in her sleep. Lena was reciting a list of names in Navajo names of people Delbert did not recognize. He woke his parents. Kenneth recognized one of the names. It belonged to his great-uncle, a man named Henry Maryboy, who had died in 1918 during the influenza epidemic and was buried, as far as Kenneth knew, in a family plot near Chinnell. The other names were not familiar. Kenneth wrote them down. He later showed the list to his sister Evelyn, who recognized 3 more names, distant relatives, all deceased, none of whom had lived within 50 miles of Wheatfields. The list is attached to the case file. The incident that precipitated the family's departure occurred on the morning of March 24th. Ruth Maryboy went to the weaving shed to continue her work and found that the loom had been altered overnight. The red wool thread that had formed the map was now woven into a shape that was not abstract. The shape was a human figure, standing in the center of the clan gathering ground, arms raised, legs apart, with the red thread radiating from its hands and feet to the corners of the weaving. The figure was unmistakably female. The figure was wearing a long skirt and a velvet blouse. The figure had a face. The face was Ruth's face. The likeness was exact the set of the eyes, the line of the mouth, the fall of the hair. It was not a generalized portrait. It was a photograph rendered in wool, perfectly, with a fidelity that Ruth knew was beyond her skill. She had not woven it. She could not have woven it. The loom had been untouched when she left it the previous evening. Ruth ran to the hogan. Kenneth went to the weaving shed and saw the weaving. He told his wife and children to pack. He drove to the Sosi trading post in Chinnell and telephoned the Navajo Tribal Police. 2 officers from the Window Rock substation, Sergeant Husky Begay and Officer Raymond Chi, arrived at the Maryboy homestead at 4:00 p.m. They examined the weaving shed, the loom, and the rug. Sergeant Begay photographed the weaving. The photographs are in the case file. I have examined them. The likeness is unmistakable. Officer Chi interviewed the family and took custody of the rug as evidence. He also took the list of names Lena had recited. While the officers were at the homestead, a neighbor, Thomas Yazzie, arrived on horseback. He told the officers that his own sheep had been found dead that morning. 17 animals, arranged in a straight line pointing directly at the Maryboy clan gathering ground. There were no tracks. There was no blood. The sheep had died, Yazzie said, with their eyes open and their bodies cold and their heads oriented east. Sergeant Begay noted the testimony in his report and filed it with the case. On March 26th, the Maryboy family's clan elders met at the chapter house in Chinnell. The meeting was closed. No minutes were kept. The elders emerged after 4 hours and informed the Maryboys that the clan gathering ground at Wheatfields was to be decommissioned, removed from use, never to be employed for ceremonies or gatherings again. The elders did not state a reason. Kenneth Maryboy accepted the decision. His sister Evelyn later told me that one of the elders had wept during the meeting, a man she had never seen cry, and that the man had said only, "The ground remembers something that should have been forgotten." A medicine man, identified in the case file only as Mr. Begay of Lukachukai, visited the Maryboy homestead on March 28th. He conducted a diagnostic ceremony, examined the weaving shed, the corral, and the clan gathering ground, and then instructed the family to dismantle and burn the loom, which they did. He instructed them to leave the homestead within the week. He did not explain further. He accepted a modest fee and departed before sunset. The Maryboy family left Wheatfields on April 2nd, 1963. They moved to a relative's property near Kayenta, leaving behind the hogan, the addition, the corral, and the charred posts of the weaving shed. Kenneth Maryboy sold his sheep to a commercial buyer. The buyer, a non-Navajo rancher from Holbrook, later told the sheriff's office that the sheep had been unmanageable and that he had sold them to a slaughterhouse within the month. The slaughterhouse has no record of the transaction. The clan gathering ground was never used again. It is still there, a flat expanse of packed earth on the rise east of the ruined homestead. The grass grows thick on it in wet years. The elders' decommission order has never been formally rescinded, and no one I spoke with in the wheatfields area was willing to walk across the ground, even in daylight. One man, a sheep herder named Nathan Shee, told me that his grandfather had said the ground was thin in that place, and that things could pass through it that should not pass. He would not elaborate. The weaving taken into evidence by the Navajo Tribal Police remains in the evidence annex at Window Rock, catalogued as exhibit. I was permitted to view the weaving in August 1973. The rug is approximately 3 feet by 4 feet, woven in natural wool on a cotton warp. The workmanship is excellent. The image of the female figure is still clearly visible. The face is still Ruth Maryboy's face. It has not faded or distorted. What disturbed me most was not the likeness. It was a detail I noticed after examining the weaving for several minutes. The figure's hands, which I had thought were empty, were not empty. Cupped in the woven palms, rendered in a thread of blue so dark it was nearly black, was a small bundle wrapped in a red cloth barely visible, easy to miss, but unmistakable once seen. I asked the evidence clerk if the bundle corresponded to anything known. She said it did not. She said Ruth Maryboy had been asked the same question in 1963 and had told the officers that she had not woven the bundle, had not seen it, and did not know what it represented. The case file contains one final document, a report from the Navajo Tribal Police dated July 1963, 4 months after the family left. An officer had returned to the Maryboy homestead to check on the property and had found a single item resting on the threshold of the abandoned hogan. The item was a bundle wrapped in red cloth, tied with a horsehair cord, containing a lock of dark hair, a small bird skull, and a photograph. The photograph was a Polaroid. It had not existed in 1963. It showed a woman standing on the clan gathering ground at Wheatfields, arms raised, wearing a long skirt and a velvet blouse. The woman was Ruth Maryboy. She was holding a bundle in her hands. Her eyes, according to the officer's report, were of a color not found in nature and oriented horizontally. The photograph was collected as evidence and is stored with the weaving. I requested to see it. My request was denied. Ruth Maryboy is still living. She is 52 years old. She has not woven since 1963. I contacted her through her nephew and requested an interview. She declined. She sent a message through the nephew that read, "The rug knew something I didn't. I don't want to know what else it knows." She has never returned to Wheatfields. The ground is still there. The weaving is still in the box. The bundle has not been opened since 1963. Lamplight Road is not on most maps. It runs east from Highway 93 for 4.5 miles of graded dirt before dead-ending at a dry wash. There are 3 properties along it. Only one is occupied today. The second property, a small homestead at the end of the road, consisting of a cinder block house and a metal pole barn, has been empty since October of 1962. The windows are boarded. A sign posted by the county reads, "No trespassing." The sign has been there long enough that the lettering is faded nearly to nothing. Nobody who lived in the area during the events of 1961 and 1962 wants to discuss them in detail. But the official record, assembled from Mojave County Sheriff's Office reports, sworn statements, and interviews with the 2 principal witnesses, tells a story that has quietly shaped local behavior for half a decade. To this day, children in the nearby town of Chloride are warned not to play on Lamplight Road after dark. When I asked why, one mother told me, because that's where the Hutchinsons lived. And you don't go where the Hutchinsons lived. Frank and Marjorie Hutchinson moved to Mojave County in the spring of 1961. He was 34, a civil engineer working on a contract for the new interstate. She was 31, a third-grade teacher who had taken a position at the elementary school in Chloride. They were quiet, unremarkable people. They kept to themselves. The property they bought had been unoccupied for a decade, a simple homestead with good well water and a view of the Surbat Mountains. The Hutchinsons planted a garden. They adopted a mixed-breed dog from the county shelter, a young male they named Lucky. Frank told a coworker that the place was exactly what we wanted, peace and quiet and nobody bothering us. The peace lasted approximately 8 months. In January 1962, Marjorie Hutchinson began reporting something unusual. At night, she would hear knocking on the bedroom window. The window was on the second floor. There was no tree near it, no trellis, nothing a person could climb. And knocking would come in patterns of 3, always 3, never more, or fewer. Frank checked the ground below the window the next morning and found no footprints. He assumed it was a bird or a branch blowing in the wind. He trimmed back the nearest mesquite. The knocking continued. In February, Marjorie saw a figure standing at the edge of the property just after sunset. It was the shape of a person, she said, but too tall, she estimated close to 7 feet, and too thin. It stood motionless at the tree line, facing the house. When she called for Frank, it was gone. Frank began sitting up at night with a shotgun. On the night of March 4th, he saw it himself. His statement to Deputy Mervyn Hatch reads as follows: "I saw a man standing out past the corral, about 100 yards out. I yelled at him to identify himself. He didn't move. I fired a warning shot into the air. He didn't move. Then he turned and walked into the brush, but the way he walked was wrong. His arms were too long. He swung them low, almost touching the ground. I did not pursue. Deputies searched the area the next day. They found no tracks, no evidence of a campsite, no indication that anyone had been on the property. In April, Lucky disappeared. The dog had been in the yard at dusk. Marjorie called for him. He did not come. Frank searched with a flashlight until midnight. They assumed a coyote had gotten him. 4 days later, at approximately 2 in the morning, Frank Hutchinson was awakened by scratching at the back door. He assumed Lucky had returned. He got up, walked to the door, and opened it. What he saw became the central piece of testimony in the sheriff's investigation, and the reason Frank Hutchinson would later request that the county seal his sworn statement from public view. The dog was there, but according to Frank's description corroborated by Marjorie, who had followed him to the door, Lucky was standing on his hind legs. His posture was fully upright, his front legs hanging at his sides, his head held at an unnatural angle that allowed him to look directly into Frank's eyes. The dog's mouth was open. Its tongue was moving. Frank told deputies he had the distinct impression that it was trying to speak. "It was my dog," Frank said in his statement, "but it wasn't my dog anymore." Marjorie screamed. The dog, or the thing that looked like their dog, dropped onto all fours and ran toward the tree line. But according to both witnesses, the movement was not the movement of a dog. The hind legs seemed too long, the spine too flexible. It ran with a strange bounding motion that Frank could only describe as wrong. It disappeared into the darkness. The Hutchinsons did not sleep that night. Frank Hutchinson boarded up the dog door before sunrise. Deputy Hatch arrived at first light. He found something that complicated the case considerably. In the dirt directly outside the back door, where the dog had been standing, there were 2 sets of tracks. The first set was canine clear paw prints, roughly the size expected from a dog of Lucky's breed. The second set was human bare feet, adult-sized, oriented in the same direction as the canine prints, as if they had been made simultaneously or in sequence. Hatch photographed both sets. The photographs show an unmistakable fact. The human footprints overlapped the canine prints in several places, and vice versa. It was impossible to tell which had come first. 15 yards from the door, the canine prints stopped completely. The human footprints continued alone, heading directly toward the tree line. Hatch followed them for approximately 300 yards before they abruptly terminated, as if the person who made them had simply ceased to exist. 2 weeks later, on the night of May 2nd, Marjorie Hutchinson woke to find Frank standing at the bedroom window, staring out. She asked him what was wrong. He did not answer. She got out of bed and joined him. Through the window, she could see the tree line clearly illuminated by a full moon. Standing just inside the trees, visible in gaps between the branches, was a figure. It was Lucky, upright, facing the house, not moving. And beside Lucky or behind him, or part of him, Marjorie could not say for certain, was the shape of a man. A tall, thin man with long, dark hair. The two figures appeared to overlap, merge, and separate as the branches moved in the wind. Marjorie pulled Frank away from the window. They sat in the hallway with the shotgun until dawn. The next morning, Frank called the sheriff again. Sheriff Howard Bixby, now retired, agreed to speak with me for this retrospective. He chose his words carefully. "We investigated that property thoroughly," Bixby said. "We interviewed both of them separately. Their stories matched. We brought in dogs. We brought in a tracker from the Wallapai Reservation. We did night surveillance. We never found a physical explanation for what they described." Bixby paused for a long moment before adding, "But I will tell you something I have not said publicly before. The tracker, a man named Vernon Apatiki, spent one night on that property. In the morning, he came to my office and said he would not return. He said the land was spoiled. He would not define that word. He simply repeated it. The land is spoiled. And he left. No charges were ever filed. No suspect was ever identified. The case was officially closed in December 1962 due to lack of evidence. Frank and Marjorie Hutchinson left Lamplight Road in October 1962, 6 months after the first incident. They moved to Phoenix and, according to relatives, never spoke of what happened again. Frank died in 1966 of a heart attack. Marjorie declined to be interviewed for this article. Through her attorney, she provided the following statement: "I do not know what we saw. I only know that we saw it, and that it was not a dream or a delusion. We were two rational people. We lived with what we saw. I do not wish to discuss it further. The property was acquired by the county through tax forfeiture in 1964. It has never been resold. The house remains standing but sealed. On the night I visited in the late spring of this year, the only thing I noticed was the quiet, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to absorb every sound. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. At the tree line, I saw something pale that might have been a branch, or might not. I did not stay long enough to learn which." McKinley County, New Mexico, September 1967. The search for Henry So began at 6:15 p.m. on Friday, September 15th, 1967. It ended 23 hours later, not because Henry So was found, but because the 32 men and women who went looking for him agreed that whatever they had been following was not Henry So, and that the canyon where they had been searching should be closed permanently. The Bureau of Indian Affairs concurred the following spring, installing a locked gate across the access road and reclassifying the area as a protected watershed with no public entry. The gate remains. The canyon has no official name on federal maps, though the families who lived near it once called it Blue Gap for the color of the shale walls in late afternoon light. Henry So was a 47-year-old sheep herder and occasional hunting guide. He lived with his wife, Lena, and their 4 children in a cluster of homes 3 miles north of the canyon rim. On the morning of September 15th, Henry had driven his pickup to the canyon to check on a deer stand he maintained for the upcoming bow season. He told Lina He would return by noon. When he had not arrived by 2 p.m., Lena sent her oldest son, Franklin, age 16, to the canyon on horseback. Franklin reached the pickup at 3:10 p.m. The vehicle was parked at the rim turnout. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition. Henry's rifle was in the gun rack. His lunch was on the seat. His boots were on the ground next to the driver's door, placed side by side, toes facing the canyon. Franklin So rode back and telephoned the McKinley County Sheriff's Office from the trading post in Navajo. Deputy Eugene Sandoval took the call at 3:45 p.m. He drove to the So residence, interviewed Lena and Franklin, and then proceeded to the canyon with Franklin in the vehicle. They arrived at 5:30 p.m. Deputy Sandoval examined the truck and the boots. In his report, he noted that the boots were clean, that the socks Henry had been wearing were folded inside them, and that the ground showed no barefoot tracks leading in any direction. At 5:50 p.m., Deputy Sandoval stood at the canyon rim and called Henry's name. A voice answered from below. Both Sandoval and Franklin So identified the voice as Henry So's. It said, "Down here. I'm down here. Come down." The voice appeared to originate from the canyon floor, approximately 300 feet below. Sandoval asked Henry if he was injured. The voice replied, "I'm not hurt. Come down. I need you to see this." Sandoval radioed dispatch and requested a search team. By 7 p.m., 32 volunteers had assembled at the rim. The group included the McKinley County Volunteer Search and Rescue Unit, several members of the So extended family, and 2 deputies from the Gallup substation. The canyon was known terrain. A trail descended the western wall and reached the floor in approximately 40 minutes. The team descended at 7:30 p.m. They carried flashlights and 1 kerosene lantern. Deputy Sandoval remained at the rim with Franklin So, continuing to call down. The voice answered each time, always sounding calm, always saying some variation of "I'm here" or "keep coming." At 8:10 p.m., the lead searcher, a man named Victor Chi, shouted up that they had reached the floor and could still hear the voice, but could not locate its source. The voice now appeared to be coming from farther east, deeper into the canyon. Chi estimated it was 40 to 50 yards ahead and slightly elevated, as though the speaker were standing on a ledge. The team moved east. The voice continued to call to them. At 8:45 p.m., the voice stopped mid-word. Victor Chi reported that the team had arrived at a sheer wall. The voice had been emanating from a narrow ledge, approximately 15 feet above the canyon floor. The ledge was empty. The team illuminated it with their flashlights and found the following: a long-sleeved cotton work shirt, Henry So's size, laid flat with arms extended. Inside the shirt was a quantity of fine gray ash, later identified as cremated bone and wood. Above the collar, someone had placed a smooth piece of obsidian, roughly the size of a human eye, polished to a reflective surface. There was no other trace of Henry So. There were no footprints on the ledge. There was no way to access the ledge without climbing equipment. Victor Chi radioed Deputy Sandoval. The transmission, recorded in the county dispatch log, contained a 12-second pause after Chi described the scene. When Sandoval asked Chi to repeat himself, Chi said, "The voice was coming from this ledge. There's nothing up here except his shirt and a rock and ash. I don't know what we were following." The team returned to the rim by 11 p.m. No one spoke during the ascent. At 6 p.m. the following morning, Lena So telephoned Deputy Sandoval and reported that she had heard her husband's voice outside the house at approximately 3 a.m. She said the voice had called her name from the direction of the sheep pen. She had not gone outside. She had gathered the children into the main room and locked the doors. At 4:15 a.m., she said, the voice had called again, this time from directly beneath the bedroom window, saying, "Let me in. It's cold. Let me come inside." She stated that the voice was her husband's, but that the cadence was wrong. She said the words were too slow and too separate, as though someone were pronouncing each syllable individually. She did not open the door. Deputy Sandoval and 3 other officers arrived at the SO residence at 7:10 a.m. They found Lena and the children exhausted but safe. A search of the property revealed no footprints near the sheep pen or the bedroom window. However, on the windowsill of the bedroom, Deputy Sandoval found a small deposit of gray ash matching the substance from the canyon ledge. The ash was collected and sent to the state laboratory in Santa Fe. The lab confirmed the ash was human cremains, at least several decades old. No source for the ash was ever identified. The So family left the home that afternoon. They moved to a relative's house in Shiprock and never returned. The residence remained standing, unoccupied, its windows boarded by the county in 1972. The access road to Blue Gap was gated in the spring of 1968. A sign reading, "Watershed Area, No Trespassing Baya," was erected. Local residents petitioned for the canyon's name to be removed from maps. It was. I interviewed Victor Chi in 1977. He was 62, living in Window Rock. He told me that his party had followed the voice for nearly half a mile along the canyon floor, and that the voice had never changed in volume, never grew closer, and never acknowledged their questions except to repeat variations of, "I'm here." He said that when they reached the sheer wall and saw the ledge was empty, the entire party fell silent for what felt like a full minute. He said one of the men, a volunteer named Harrison Begay, began weeping without explanation. When I asked Chi what he thought the voice had been, he declined to answer. He told me he had not returned to Blue Gap and would not. He said Henry So was never found. Henry So remains a missing person. The case file is held in the closed records section of the McKinley County Sheriff's Office in Gallup. The gray ash collected from the ledge and the windowsill is stored in the evidence annex. The obsidian stone was cataloged as evidence item and then transferred to the New Mexico State Police Forensic Repository in 1973. When I requested access to the repository for verification, I was informed that item was unavailable for review. No reason was provided. The box containing the item was described as present but empty. The ash remains in storage. The shirt remains in storage. The canyon remains closed. Henry So's voice has not been heard again, though Lena So, in a statement to the sheriff's office in 1968, reported that she had dreamed of her husband standing on the canyon rim, calling to her, holding the obsidian stone in his open hand, and that in the dream she had walked toward him and then woken before reaching the edge. She said the dream recurred monthly. She said she did not wish it to stop. Many Farms, Arizona. The first report came into the Bureau of Indian Affairs substation at Chinle on the morning of October 19, 1953. A sheepherder named Albert Sosi, age 41, had ridden 12 miles across open high desert scrub to report that his neighbors, the Begay family of the Black Rock Mesa area, had missed 3 consecutive trading days at the Many Farms post. This was not, by itself, remarkable. The Begays ran a modest flock of 36 Navajo churro sheep and kept to themselves. The family consisted of Hostine David Begay, 55, his wife, Alice, 47, their daughter, Marie, 22, Marie's infant son, Jonas, 11 months, and Alice's elderly uncle, Charlie Yazzie, who was nearly blind and rarely left the hogan. They lived in a traditional 6-sided hogan with a separate brush arbor for summer cooking, positioned on a south-facing slope above a dry wash. What was remarkable was the state of their livestock. Sosi told Baya officer Samuel Teller that he had ridden past the Begay place 2 days earlier and noticed the sheep still penned in their night corral at midday. When he rode closer, he found the gate latched from the outside. The sheep were unharmed, but badly dehydrated. Several had collapsed. There was no sign of the family. No smoke from the hogan chimney, and the family's 3 horses remained in the pole corral behind the dwelling, also without water. I did not go inside. Sosi told Officer Teller, according to the incident report. I did not want to go inside. Teller, a Navajo man who had served with the Baya for 11 years, assembled a small search party consisting of himself, a livestock inspector named Henry Chi, and 2 volunteers from the Many Farms chapter house. They drove as far as the unmaintained track allowed and then continued on horseback, reaching the Begay homestead at approximately 2:30 p.m. on October 20th. What the search party found inside the hogan defied immediate explanation. The Baya report, later reviewed by the FBI's Gallup field office and subsequently returned to tribal jurisdiction, describes the interior this way. Dwelling found in orderly condition. Table set for 5 persons. Meal consisted of mutton stew, fry bread, and coffee. Food had dried in bowls. Coffee cups approximately half full. No indication of struggle. Personal effects, including jewelry, money, $47 in cash, and 2 rifles, remained in place. Beds appeared slept in. Stove cold. No bodies, no blood, no sign of forced entry. Door closed, but not locked from outside. 1 kerosene lamp still burning. Fuel completely exhausted. The lamp was the detail that troubled Officer Teller. A standard household kerosene lamp of the type widely distributed by the trading posts would burn for perhaps 6 to 8 hours on a full reservoir. For it to have burned until the fuel was entirely gone suggested the family had left the hogan in darkness, or that the lamp had been lit and then abandoned sometime in the evening, and no one had returned to extinguish it. The party conducted an immediate sweep of the surrounding terrain. Within 20 minutes, Henry Chi located the first track. Beginning approximately 40 yards east of the hogan, a single set of footprints led away from the dwelling into the open desert. The Baya report describes them as made by a bare human foot, size consistent with an adult male, progressing in a straight line toward a sandstone outcrop known locally as Coyote's Back. The prints were deep, as though the individual had been running or carrying weight. No other tracks accompanied them. Chi and Teller followed the trail for approximately 3/4 of a mile. It was Teller who first noticed the irregularity. The track, he later wrote in a supplemental statement, began to change gradually from a human footprint to that of an animal, specifically a large canid, possibly a coyote or wolf. The transition occurred over a distance of roughly 30 feet. By the end of that interval, the track was unmistakably not human. The coyote-like prints continued for another 200 yards, then stopped. They did not fade or drift. They simply ended on a flat slab of exposed sandstone, as though whatever had made them had ceased to exist at that precise point. No return tracks of any kind were located. A search of the area within a 1-mile radius found no bodies, no clothing, no additional sign of the 5 missing individuals. Within days, the Begay disappearance became known across the western Navajo reservation. The San Juan County Record ran a brief item on October 27th, headlined, "Family of 5 Vanishes Near Many Farms. Search Continuing." But the newspaper account, constrained by space and the limited information released by the Baya, gave no sense of the unease that had already settled over the Black Rock Mesa communities. Albert Susi, the neighbor who had first raised the alarm, would not return to the area. He moved his flock to grazing land near Rough Rock, 15 miles distant, and when asked why by a chapter official, replied only that the mesa was not right now. Other families with grazing permits in the area began to keep their animals closer to their homes. One elderly woman, Mary Claw of the Red Willow Springs clan, was overheard telling her granddaughter that the Begay home was a place where the boundary between things is worn thin. The phrase appears nowhere in any official report, but it surfaces repeatedly in interviews conducted later by ethnographers and by the New Mexico Historical Quarterly, which revisited the case in a 1967 issue devoted to unsolved disappearances in the Four Corners region. The detail that ultimately embedded this case in local memory was not the empty hogan or even the vanishing family. It was the track. In the spring of 1954, a Bureau of Indian Affairs soil technician named Robert C. Harding, who had been sent to Black Rock Mesa on an unrelated erosion survey, visited the site at the request of Officer Teller. Harding photographed the last discernible footprint, the fully animal print, using a speed graphic camera with a ruler placed alongside it for scale. The photograph still exists in the Baya's Southwest Regional Archives in Albuquerque. The print measures nearly 5.5 inches in length, consistent with a large coyote. But Harding's subsequent plaster cast, also preserved, captured something the photograph did not. Embedded in the toe of the animal track, faint but unmistakable under magnification, is the whorled ridge pattern of a human fingerprint. The cast was examined in 1955 by an anthropologist at the University of New Mexico, Dr. Helen Sorensen, who wrote in a confidential memorandum, "The ridge detail visible in the anterior portion of the track is consistent with a human distal phalanx. The print appears to have been made by the pad of a human toe within what is otherwise a canted trackway. I cannot account for this." The memorandum, marked for internal review only, was never published. A copy was later obtained by the Quarterly. The FBI opened a brief inquiry under the classification, aiding and abetting of fugitive unknown subjects, but closed the file in April 1954, citing lack of federal jurisdiction over missing persons on tribal land. The Navajo Tribal Police maintained an open missing persons file on the Begay family through 1963, when the case was administratively suspended. No remains have ever been located. No member of the Begay family has ever contacted authorities, claimed benefits, or been identified anywhere in the United States. The family's sheep were eventually sold at auction by the Baya's Grazing Committee. The proceeds, totaling $214, were held in trust for 15 years, and then absorbed into the general fund. The hogan still stands. It has not been occupied since October of 1953. In the decades that followed, the area around Black Rock Mesa acquired a quiet reputation. Local families, particularly those with young children, began to avoid camping within sight of the sandstone outcrop known as Coyote's Back. The grazing permits for the immediate vicinity went unused, even during years when forage was plentiful. Anthropologists working in the region in the 1970s recorded several oblique references to a place where a family was walked out of the world. The phrase was used without elaboration. Informants declined to discuss it further. The incident at many farms has never been satisfactorily explained. It remains in the careful language of the 1967 Quarterly Retrospective, a case in which the physical evidence exceeds the capacity of any conventional account to contain it, and in which the human loss 5 people, 4 generations, 1 infant should not be permitted to disappear from memory simply because we cannot name what took them. To this day, Navajo families of the area teach their children not to answer whistles heard after dark near the mesa. No one can recall precisely when the warning began or who first spoke it, but everyone knows why. Fort Duchesne, Utah. By 1964, the land that had once been the Hewitt Ranch was held by the Uinta Basin Land and Cattle Company, a limited partnership registered in Cheyenne, Wyoming, whose principals included a retired petroleum engineer and 2 investors from Salt Lake City. The company ran approximately 300 head on the property, managed by a series of ranch foremen who rarely stayed longer than a single season. The isolation was difficult. The winters were punishing, and the ranch had a reputation, unspoken but understood, that made it difficult to retain experienced help. Raymond A. Loomis, the foreman who took the position in March of 1964, was not a man easily unsettled. He was 42 years old, a Korean War veteran who had served with the 2nd Infantry Division, earning a Bronze Star during the fighting around Chippewa-Nye. After the war, he had worked cattle operations in Wyoming, Montana, and northern Nevada. He was competent, self-contained, and by his own admission, not given to introspection. "You spend enough time alone in open country," he told a friend. "You stop jumping at shadows. Shadows are just shadows." Ray Loomis would leave the Uinta Basin Land and Cattle Company in November of 1964. He never worked on a ranch again. In 1979, he granted an extended interview to a folklorist from Brigham Young University on the condition that his identity be protected and the tape not be released until after his death. The tape was unsealed in 1995. It runs just under 3 hours. What follows is drawn from that interview, from contemporaneous records of the Uinta County Sheriff's Office, and from the accounts of 2 other individuals who worked on the property during Loomis's tenure and were later located by researchers. Loomis first saw it on April 18, 1964, roughly 1 hour before sunset. He had been repairing a windmill pump in the south pasture and was walking back to his truck when he noticed a man standing at the edge of the cedar scrub, approximately 200 yards to the west. The man was motionless. He appeared to be wearing a dark wool coat and a flat-brimmed hat of a style Loomis associated with old photographs of his grandfather's generation. Loomis raised a hand in greeting. The man did not respond. Loomis called out, "No answer." He began walking toward the figure, and when he had closed the distance by half, the man turned and walked into the trees. Loomis did not follow. He told himself it was a trespasser, perhaps a hunter who had wandered onto the property. But he had not seen a rifle, and the man's stillness troubled him in a way he could not articulate. The figure appeared again on April 25th, and again on May 3rd, and again on May 19th, always in the same location, always at the same hour, always motionless, always vanishing when approached. Loomis began to dread the end of the workday. He told no one. He later explained, "What would I say? There's a man standing by the trees, and he won't talk to me. That's not a problem for the sheriff. That's a problem for a psychiatrist." On the evening of June 7th, Loomis approached the figure more aggressively, driving his truck off the track and directly toward the tree line. He stopped perhaps 60 feet away and killed the engine. The man did not retreat. For the first time, Loomis saw his face clearly. It was his father. William H. Loomis had died of a myocardial infarction on February 12, 1952, in the kitchen of the family home in Laramie, Wyoming. Ray Loomis, then stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, had been granted emergency leave to attend the funeral. He had helped carry the casket. He had seen his father's body lowered into the frozen ground at Green Hill Cemetery. He had visited the grave with his mother on the first anniversary of the death. The man standing at the tree line was, in every visible particular, William Loomis. The same face, the same posture, the same slight cant of the left shoulder that had never straightened after a horse threw him in 1938. He was wearing the same dark wool coat in which he had been buried, and the same flat-brimmed Stetson he had worn every day of Ray's childhood. Ray Loomis sat in the cab of his truck for what he estimated to be 10 minutes. The figure did not move. Eventually, Loomis opened the door, stepped out, and spoke. "Dad?" The figure replied. The voice, Loomis said, was unmistakably his father's, though it carried a quality he described as flat, like a recording that's been played a little too slow. The figure said, "Ray, they're not gone. None of them are gone." Then the figure turned and walked into the cedar scrub. Loomis did not pursue. He returned to the ranch house, poured himself a whiskey, and sat at the kitchen table until dawn. The next morning, he walked to the spot where the figure had stood. On the ground, lying on a flat stone, as though placed there deliberately, was a Zippo lighter, chrome-plated, engraved with the initials WHL. It was identical to the lighter his father had carried in the breast pocket of his coat every day of his adult life. The lighter had been buried with him. Ray Loomis knew this because he had placed it in the casket himself. Loomis telephoned his sister, Margaret Loomis Harper, who lived in Cheyenne. He told her only that he had found a lighter that looked like their father's, and asked whether she was certain it had been interred. She confirmed. She had watched him place it in the casket. She remembered because their mother had objected, saying the lighter should go to Ray, but Ray had insisted. At Margaret's urging, and after a difficult conversation with their mother, who was then 74 and living in a care facility, the family petitioned the Albany County District Court for an exhumation order, citing a need to verify the integrity of the burial. The order was granted on July 19, 1964, on the condition that the exhumation be conducted privately and the remains reinterred within 48 hours. The casket was raised on the morning of July 22nd in the presence of the cemetery sexton, a representative of the funeral home, and Margaret Harper. Ray Loomis did not attend. He was at the ranch and later said he did not wish to be present. The casket was opened. It was empty. The interior lining was intact. The pillow upon which William Loomis's head had rested showed a faint indentation. The clothing, the dark wool coat, the trousers, the white shirt, the necktie, was arranged exactly as it had been at the viewing. But the body was gone. In its place, lying on the chest of the folded coat, was a single sheet of ruled paper, torn from a pocket notebook, upon which a sentence had been written in blue ink. Margaret Harper later provided a sworn affidavit describing the note. The handwriting, she stated, was unquestionably that of our father. She had kept his letters for years and compared them immediately upon returning home. The sentence read, "I will wait for Raymond at the ranch." The exhumation was photographed. The photographs, along with the note, were turned over to the Albany County Sheriff's Office, which opened a grave theft investigation. The investigation produced no leads. The casket had not been disturbed. The grave showed no evidence of excavation. The cemetery sexton testified that the plot had been mowed and maintained regularly, and no signs of intrusion had ever been observed. The note was subjected to handwriting analysis by a forensic document examiner retained by the sheriff's office, who concluded that it matched known exemplars of William Loomis's handwriting and showed no signs of forgery or imitation. The examiner added a handwritten comment to his report. "I have no explanation." The document appears to have been written recently, as the ink shows minimal fading, but the author has been deceased for 12 years. Following the exhumation, Loomis informed his employers that he intended to resign. They asked him to remain through the end of the grazing season, and he agreed, on the condition that he be permitted to hire a night watchman. The company approved the expense. The watchman, a 48-year-old Ute man named Harrison Tavapont, began work on August 3, 1964. He was recommended by the tribal office in Fort Duchesne. He was a quiet, reliable man who had worked as a security guard at a uranium mill in Moab. Loomis provided him with a surplus .30-30 rifle and a 1953 Dodge pickup. His instructions were simple: patrol the perimeter after dark, check the cattle, and report anything unusual. Tavapont worked without incident for 11 weeks. On the night of October 19, 1964, he failed to check in by radio at the 2:00 a.m. call, and again at 4:00 a.m. at dawn. Loomis drove to the North Pasture Gate and found the Dodge pickup idling in the middle of the access track, driver's door standing open. The headlights were on. The radio inside the cab was receiving, the volume turned up. No one was inside. On the driver's seat, arranged with the neatness of a hotel valet, were the following items: 1 pair of leather work boots, size 10, worn but serviceable, placed side by side with the toes pointing toward the passenger door. 1 pair of wool socks, folded. 1 leather belt with a plain brass buckle. 1 canvas work jacket, folded. 1 felt cowboy hat, brim up, centered on the passenger seat. 1 wristwatch, a manual wind Bulova, still running. The watch was the first detail Loomis noticed. The second hand was moving, but it was moving counterclockwise. Harrison Tavapont was not in the truck. He was not anywhere in the vicinity. A search of the pasture, conducted by sheriff's deputies later that morning, found no footprints leading away from the vehicle, no sign of a struggle, and no blood on the ground. The rifle was still in the rack behind the seat, loaded and unfired. Inside the boots, Loomis found a substance he initially took for water. It was not water. It was blood. The boots were taken as evidence by the Anta County Sheriff's Office and transported to the state crime laboratory. The blood was typed as O negative. Harrison Tavapont's medical records, obtained from the Indian Health Service, confirmed that he was O negative. The volume of blood recovered from the interior of the boots, measured after extraction in the laboratory, was approximately 2.4 liters, roughly 5 pints, or half the total blood volume of an adult male. The lab found no other fluids, no tissue, and no trace of any substance that would account for the blood having been deposited in the boots without a body present. The leather was saturated, but not soaked through to the exterior. The blood appeared to have originated from inside the boots. Sheriff's Deputy Ronald K. Chee, who led the scene investigation, noted in his report, the boots were upright and undisturbed. The laces were still tied. It is difficult to conceive of how a quantity of liquid blood could be introduced into a pair of upright, laced boots without leaving traces on the exterior surface or on the surrounding ground. It is more difficult to conceive of how the blood could have originated from an individual who is not present and whose whereabouts remain unknown. The wristwatch, a 1947 Bulova A11, was examined by a watchmaker in Vernal at the request of investigators. The watchmaker, a man with 40 years of experience, reported that the movement had been altered in a manner he could not explain. The escapement had been modified precisely, deliberately, so that the balance wheel oscillated in the opposite direction from the manufacturer's design. The alteration required tools he did not believe existed in 1964. "I could not make this watch run backwards if I wanted to," he told the sheriff. "And even if I could, it would not keep accurate time. But this watch does. It loses approximately 4 seconds a day, counterclockwise." The watchmaker, asked if he could explain how the modification was accomplished, replied, "I can't even explain how it's possible." The watch and the boots remain in the custody of the Anta County Sheriff's Office, stored in the evidence locker of the cold case unit. The blood samples were forwarded to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. in November 1964. A response dated January 12, 1965, confirmed that the blood was of human origin, type O negative, and that DNA testing, then in its infancy, was inconclusive. The samples were never returned to Utah. The FBI's file on the case consists of 14 pages, of which 12 are entirely redacted. Raymond Loomis resigned his position on November 2, 1964. He left Utah and never returned. He worked briefly as a carpenter in Oregon, then as a night janitor at a high school in Boise, Idaho. He never married. He told the folklorist in 1979, "I stopped looking at tree lines after that year. I don't go near them. I don't like what stands there." Harrison Tavapont's body was never found. His family held a memorial service in the spring of 1965. His name was added to the tribal roll of the deceased. In the decades that followed, members of his extended family occasionally reported seeing a man, matching his description, standing at the edge of certain pastures on the old ranch property, always at dusk, always motionless. These reports were never formally investigated. They were not the kind of thing the sheriff's office had jurisdiction to investigate. The Uinta Basin Land and Cattle Company ceased operations on the property in 1968. The ranch was sold to an absentee owner who visited twice and then allowed the grazing leases to expire. The homestead buildings deteriorated. The corrals collapsed. The windmill stopped turning. In 1994, the property was purchased by a private individual with an interest in unconventional scientific research. By then, the name by which the ranch had become known not on maps, but in the surrounding communities, among the Ute and Navajo families, and among a small circle of researchers familiar with the 1951 and 1964 cases, was fixed. People called it the SKINWALKER Ranch. They had called it that, some said, for as long as anyone could remember. Even before the Hewitts, even before Loomis. A name that referred, in the simplest translation, to something that wears the shape of a man, but is not one. The two incidents separated by 13 years, 40 miles from the better-known cases at many farms and Teak-Nos Paws, to the south share a common architecture. A family disappeared or destroyed. Physical evidence that refused classification. A law enforcement response that ended in sealed files and forwarded samples and official silence. And a community that learned, in the way small communities learn these things, that certain pieces of ground are not safe. Not because of what might attack you there, but because of what you might recognize standing at the edge of the trees, wearing a face you had buried 12 years ago, waiting for you to come close enough to hear what it has to say. The disappearance of Hosteen Bege Montezuma Creek, San Juan County, Utah. The last person to speak with Hosteen David Bege before his death was his niece, Eleanor Yazzie, then 23 years old. She gave her statement to Deputy Sheriff Raymond Lyman on the morning of September 8th, 1952, and she never altered a single detail in the 29 years that followed. She told Lyman that her uncle had come to her family's hogan at dusk on September 7th. He had walked 6 miles from his own place near the creek bottom, which was not unusual for a man who had spent 64 years ranching that same stretch of scrubland and knew every arroyo by name. What was unusual was that he arrived carrying nothing. No saddlebag, no rifle, no bedroll. His boots were wet, though it had not rained in 17 days. He sat down by the fire and didn't say anything for a long time. Yazzie told Deputy Lyman, according to the original report, typed on a Smith Corona and still held in the San Juan County archives. Then he said, "Something has been walking around my hogan at night, but it does not leave tracks." I asked him what he meant. He said, "It walks on 2 legs, but the feet are wrong. The feet go the other direction." Deputy Lyman noted in the margin, "Subject appears lucid," repeating what was told to her. No indication of intoxication or mental distress. David Bege's property consisted of 40 acres of deeded land abutting BLM range, a 2-room stone house, a livestock pen, and a well that had been hand-dug by his father in 1908. He ran 37 head of sheep and kept 3 horses. He was known to the trading post in Bluff as a reliable man who paid his credit on time and never raised his voice. The closest neighbor was a family named Cly, 2 miles east. On September 6th, the day before Bege walked to his niece's hogan, Martin Cly rode over to borrow a Kullawa winch. He found Bege sitting on a wooden crate outside his house, facing the livestock pen. The sheep were still in the pen. It was past noon, and the animals should have been moved to the north pasture hours earlier. Cly gave his statement on September 9th. "I asked him if everything was all right," Cly told Deputy Lyman. "He said he hadn't slept. I asked why. He pointed at the ground in front of his door. There was a patch of dirt there, maybe 10 feet across, that looked like it had been swept with a broom. Completely smooth. No footprints. No animal tracks. No tire marks. Just smooth dirt. I asked him who swept it. He said nobody swept it. He said it was like that when he came out at sunrise." Cly described Bege as worn out, like a man who'd been arguing with someone all night. But Bege lived alone. He had lived alone since his wife died in 1947. Cly did not stay long. He told Lyman that something about the swept dirt bothered him, though he could not say why. "It was too clean," he said. "Out there, nothing stays clean." Eleanor Yazzie told Deputy Lyman that her uncle stayed at her family's hogan for approximately 3 hours. He ate a small portion of mutton stew. He spoke very little. Her husband, Herbert Yazzie, said that Bege kept looking toward the door. which was unusual for a man raised in Navajo tradition, who would have been taught not to focus attention on thresholds after dark. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Bege stood and said he was going home. Herbert Yazzie offered to drive him. Bege refused. He said he needed to walk. He said something else that Eleanor Yazzie initially did not include in her statement, but which she added to the record in a follow-up interview conducted by the FBI field office in Flagstaff on September 22nd. He said, "If I am not the same man when I come back, do not let me in." Herbert Yazzie confirmed the statement. "I thought he was speaking figuratively," Herbert told the FBI agent. "I thought he meant he would be changed by something. I did not think he meant that he would not be himself." Bege left on foot, heading southwest toward Montezuma Creek. The moon was 3/4 full. The temperature was in the mid-50s. No one saw him alive again. Eleanor Yazzie drove to Bege's ranch on the morning of September 8th, after he failed to appear at the trading post, where he had agreed to meet a buyer for wool. She found the livestock pen open. The sheep were gone. 2 of the 3 horses were still in the corral. The 3rd horse, a bay mare named Dust, was found half a mile north, standing motionless in a dry wash. The horse was uninjured, but refused to move. Martin Cly later had to blindfold the animal to lead her back. The front door of the stone house stood open. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. Bege's rifle was on the wall rack. His boots were beside the bed. His bedroll was unrolled, the blankets turned down. On the bedside table, Eleanor Yazzie found her uncle's eyeglasses, a King James Bible, and a half-full glass of water. On the floor beside the bed was a single partial footprint. Deputy Lyman photographed the print. The photograph, still in evidence, shows a human-like footprint pressed deeply into the wool rug beside Bege's bed. The toes are clearly defined. The arch is visible, but the print is reversed. The toes point toward the heel of a walking person, and the heel points forward. It is as though someone stood facing the bed, but their foot was on backward. Lyman measured the print. It was 11.5 inches long and 4 inches wide at the ball, consistent with a man's size 10 or 11 boot. No corresponding print was found elsewhere in the house or on the property. The swept patch of dirt in front of the door was no longer smooth. It was covered in hoof prints from the escaping sheep. Lyman noted that whatever had swept the dirt clean the previous morning had not returned. The official search for David Bege lasted 11 days. It involved the San Juan County Sheriff's Office, the Utah Highway Patrol, 17 volunteers from Bluff and Montezuma Creek, and 2 Bureau of Indian Affairs officers. Search crews covered approximately 40 square miles of canyon, scrubland, and creek bottom. They found no sign of Bege. On the 12th day, September 19th, a search party led by Martin Cly rode into an unnamed side canyon approximately 3 miles southwest of Bege's ranch. The canyon was narrow, with walls of red sandstone rising 60 to 80 feet. The floor was sand and loose rock. There was no water source, and the canyon dead-ended in a dry waterfall. It was not a place where livestock would wander, and there was no reason for a man to go there on foot. At the base of the dry waterfall, the search party found 37 sheep carcasses. The sheep had been dead for several days. The carcasses were arranged in a circle, each animal on its side with its head pointing outward. The arrangement was deliberate and precise. No animal showed signs of predator attack. There were no bullet wounds. Martin Cly, who had butchered livestock his entire life, examined 3 of the animals and found no cause of death. He told Deputy Lyman that the sheep appeared to have simply lain down and died where they were placed. The ground inside the circle of sheep was swept completely smooth. Approximately 20 feet up the canyon wall, wedged into a crevice, the search party found a bundle of clothing, a denim shirt, cotton trousers, and a wool jacket. The clothing was identified by Eleanor Yazzie as belonging to her uncle. The garments were not torn or bloodied. They were neatly folded. Inside the shirt pocket, Deputy Lyman found David Begay's wallet containing $12, his grazing permit, and a photograph of his deceased wife. Begay's body was never found. 3 nights after the discovery of the sheep, Martin Cly woke at approximately 2:00 a.m. to the sound of his dogs barking. He told Deputy Lyman that the barking was unlike anything he had heard before. The dogs were not aggressive but terrified, making what Cly described as a sound like puppies crying. Cly took his rifle and stepped onto the porch of his house. The moon was bright enough to see by. Standing at the edge of the property, just beyond the fence line, was a man. The man was naked. His body was covered in what Cly described as a gray-white powder, like ash or dust. The man stood facing the house, and although Cly could not see his face clearly at that distance, he said the man's posture was wrong. His shoulders were set too far back, and his arms hung at an angle that Cly said did not match the way a man's arms hang. The man was standing with his back to Cly, but his feet pointed toward the house. Cly shouted. He fired 1 round from his rifle into the air. The man did not flinch. Instead, according to Cly's statement, he turned and walked away, but he did not turn around to walk away. He just started moving backward toward the house, but getting farther away. He moved like something that didn't need to turn around. Cly did not fire at the man. When asked why, he told Deputy Lyman, "Because I was afraid I would hit my neighbor." He later clarified that he meant David Begay. The case of Hosteen David Begay was never officially closed. The FBI field office in Flagstaff maintained an open file until 1963, when it was transferred to the Bureau's inactive archive. The San Juan County Sheriff's Office retained the physical evidence, the photographs, the folded clothing, Deputy Lyman's typed reports, until a flood in 1978 damaged the evidence room and destroyed the clothing. The photographs survived. Eleanor Yazzie continued to live in Montezuma Creek until her death in 1999. In a 1981 interview with the San Juan Record, conducted after the case file was unsealed, she was asked whether she believed her uncle had died. "No," she said. "I believe he came back. And I believe that what came back was not him, but something wearing him. And I believe that when he told us not to let him in, he knew what was going to happen, and he was trying to protect us." Martin Cly sold his ranch in 1955 and moved to Flagstaff. He died in 1972. In his later years, he refused to discuss the case, except to say that he still dreamed about the man covered in ash, moving backward into the dark. The canyon where the sheep were found has no official name on any map. Locals in Montezuma Creek refer to it as Begay's End. Hikers avoid it. Ranchers do not graze livestock within 2 miles of its mouth. According to a 2003 survey conducted by a University of Utah anthropology graduate student, every Navajo family interviewed within a 30-mile radius of the canyon reported that their grandparents had instructed them never to enter it after dark, and never to answer if they heard their own name called from inside. The tradition began in September 1952. The folded clothing in the canyon crevice, containing wallet and identification, but no body, and no explanation for how a 64-year-old man could disappear from locked clothing in a dead-end canyon where 37 of his sheep lay arranged in a circle on swept ground. McKinley County, New Mexico, November 1957. The trading post at Chuska Spring operated continuously from 1912 until the morning of November 17th, 1957, when the family that owned it locked the front door, placed the key under the porch board where the mail carrier knew to look, and drove east on Route 66 without stopping to collect the clothes still hanging on the line behind the residence. The post was never reopened. The merchandise remained on the shelves. The coffee can beside the register still held $43 in coins and scrip. The gasoline pump out front, a manual glass bowl model, was full. No explanation was ever filed with the county, and the owners the Nakai family, 3 generations of traders who had operated the post for 45 years, declined every subsequent request for comment. The building still stands. The roof collapsed in the winter of 1966. The gasoline pump is rusted solid. The coffee can is gone, but the counter is still there. And so is the ledger. And so, according to the 2 people I spoke with, who have been inside since 1957, is the photograph. I began investigating the Chuska Spring case in the summer of 1970, after a passing reference in a 1958 Bureau of Indian Affairs report caught my attention. The report, a routine summary of trading post operations on the Eastern Navajo Reservation, noted that Post Chuska Spring was closed by operator decision in November 1957, and that the operator, a Mr. Henry Nakai, had declined to provide a reason. The BF field agent had added a single handwritten sentence in the margin. Mr. Nakai appeared to be in fear of his life and would not speak inside the building. I located the field agent, now retired and living in Albuquerque. He told me that he had interviewed Nakai in the parking lot of a motel in Gallup, at Nakai's insistence. Nakai, he said, had refused to meet at the BIA office, at the post, or at any location with 4 walls. He said Nakai kept his back to the open desert during the entire interview and would not state on the record what had happened. The agent closed the file and recommended no further action. He told me he had never forgotten the interview. He said Nakai had wept once, without warning, and then denied doing so. I have reconstructed the events of autumn 1957 from 4 sources. The sheriff's case file, which is thin but exists. The testimony of a former McKinley County deputy who responded to the sole official call. A series of letters written by the Nakai family's daughter to a cousin in Phoenix, which the cousin preserved and shared with me. And a single recorded conversation with a Navajo medicine man, now deceased, who visited the post in the final week. The Chuska Spring trading post stood at the intersection of 2 unmaintained roads, 22 miles south of the Baja route to Chaco Canyon. It served perhaps 15 Navajo families who ran sheep in the surrounding grazing camps, plus the occasional traveler. Henry Nakai, 58, operated the post with his wife, Alice, 54, and their daughter, Lorraine, 19, who helped with the ledger and the dry goods. The family lived in a 3-room addition attached to the rear of the post. A sheep pen and a small grazing camp sat on the flats 200 yards east, where the family kept a modest herd of 30 churro sheep. The nearest neighbor was the Sosi family, who lived 4 miles south and who later provided most of the witness testimony to the sheriff's office. The first incident, according to Lorraine Nakai's letters, occurred on the evening of October 3rd, 1957. Lorraine had been closing the register when she noticed a man standing at the edge of the parking lot, beyond the gasoline pump, facing the building. She estimated the time as 5:45 p.m., just at dusk. The man was Navajo, she thought, or appeared to be dark hair, weathered skin, of average height. He wore a denim jacket and dark trousers. He was barefoot. He was standing perfectly still, his arms at his sides, watching the front door of the post. Lorraine called to her father. When Henry Nakai came to the window, the man was still there. Henry stepped outside and called a greeting in Navajo. The man did not answer. Henry walked toward him. At approximately 20 feet, Henry stopped. He later told Alice that the man's eyes were wrong, that they were not looking at him, but through him, at something behind him, and that the irises were the color of old brass. Henry returned to the post and locked the door. When he looked out the window again, the man was gone. The following evening, the man was back. This time, he was standing 10 feet closer to the building. Lorraine noted in her letter that the man was standing on the exact spot where her father had stopped walking the night before, as though he had advanced precisely to the limit of Henry's approach. Again, Henry went outside. Again, the man did not speak. Henry shouted at him. The man did not react. Henry threw a stone. The stone struck the ground near the man's bare feet. The man did not flinch. Henry retreated inside. The man remained in the parking lot until full dark, when Lorraine looked again and could no longer see him. This pattern repeated for the next 6 nights. Each evening, the man appeared at dusk. Each evening, he stood a few feet closer to the post. On October 7th, he was standing beside the gasoline pump. On October 9th, he was on the porch. Henry Nakai telephoned the McKinley County Sheriff's Office on the morning of October 10th and reported a trespasser. Deputy Benjamin Key arrived at the post at 2:00 p.m. that afternoon. He interviewed the family and searched the grounds. He found no footprints on the porch, despite the dust that should have recorded them. He found no sign of anyone camping in the vicinity. He told Henry Nakai to call again if the man returned and left. The man did not appear that evening. The Nakai family allowed themselves to believe the incident was over. On October 12th, a Saturday, Alice Nakai walked to the family grazing camp to check on the sheep. She found the entire herd 30 churros lying dead in the sheep pen. The animals had not been bitten, cut, or injured. There was no blood. The sheep were arranged in a spiral that wound inward from the pen's fence line to a tight central point, where a single lamb lay on its side with a piece of turquoise resting on its neck. The turquoise was old, polished, of a type Alice recognized from her grandmother's jewelry, a stone that had been buried with her grandmother in a family plot 40 miles away in 1942. Alice Nakai knew the stone was her grandmother's because the grandmother had chipped it in 1938 and the mark was distinctive. She had attended the burial. She had watched the grave filled with earth. She did not touch the stone. She ran back to the post and telephoned the sheriff's office. Deputy Key returned with 2 additional officers and a livestock inspector. The inspector, a Navajo man named Raymond So, examined the sheep and noted in his report that the animals had died of cardiac arrest within a narrow window, and that there were no tracks in the pen other than Alice's. The spiral arrangement, he wrote, was precise and consistent with intentional placement. The turquoise stone was collected as evidence. The sheep were buried in a mass pit by county workers. The stone was later returned to the Nakai family, who refused to accept it. It remains in the county evidence annex. On October 15th, the man appeared again. This time, he was inside the trading post. Henry Nakai had been closing the store at 7:00 p.m. He locked the front door. He turned off the main lights. As he was walking toward the rear addition, he passed the dry goods aisle and saw the man standing at the end of it, facing the shelves, his back to Henry. The man was wearing the same denim jacket. His bare feet were visible below the shelf. Henry later told Deputy Key that the man was not breathing, that his shoulders were still, that the dust in the aisle was undisturbed, that there was a stillness to the figure that felt like a photograph, not a person. Henry ran to the living quarters. Alice and Lorraine were already in bed. He did not tell them what he had seen. He sat in the kitchen with a rifle until dawn. The man was not there in the morning. On October 18th, Henry Nakai drove to the Tsosi residence and asked the family matriarch, Martha Tsosi, for the name of a medicine man. She directed him to a Hattawee named Jonathan Begay, who lived near Crown Point. Begay agreed to visit the trading post on October 20th. He spent 3 hours at the property. He examined the trading post, the living quarters, the sheep pen, and the parking lot. He did not speak to the Nakai family while he worked. At the end of his visit, he told Henry Nakai 2 things. First, he told Henry to dig beneath the threshold of the trading post's front door. He said something had been placed there that did not belong, and that it must be removed and burned. Second, he told Henry that his family should not spend another night at the post after the threshold had been cleared. He said they should leave within the week. He would not explain further. He refused payment. He left before sunset. Henry Nakai dug beneath the front door threshold on the morning of October 21st. At a depth of approximately 18 inches, he found a small bundle wrapped in deerskin, tied with a length of horsehair cord. Inside the bundle were the following: a braid of human hair, dark and fine, consistent with a young woman; a child's deciduous tooth, molar, with the roots intact; and a photograph. The photograph was a tintype old of a type popular in the 1880s. It showed the trading post as it had appeared when it was built, the same roofline, the same porch, the same gasoline pump, which should not have been possible because the pump was not installed until 1948. Standing in front of the post, posed stiffly as tintype subjects always are, were three people: a man in a denim jacket and dark trousers, barefoot; a woman in a long skirt, her face blurred as though she had moved during the exposure; and a girl of perhaps 10, holding a lamb in her arms. The man was the man from the parking lot. The girl's face was the face of Lorraine Nakai, who had not been born when the tintype would have been taken, and who was 19 years old and alive and standing in the kitchen when her father dug up the photograph. Henry Nakai showed the photograph to his wife. Alice Nakai identified the girl as Lorraine. Henry showed it to Lorraine. Lorraine identified the girl as herself. The family burned the bundle in the sheep pen that afternoon. Henry did not save the photograph. He burned it too. He told the sheriff's deputy later that he had watched the tintype curl in the flames, and that the image of the man had not faded as it burned, that the man's face had remained clear until the paper blackened completely, and that the eyes in the photograph had seemed, in the firelight, to be looking past him at the trading post. The Nakai family left Chuska Spring on the morning of November 17th. They drove to Gallup, stayed one night in a motel, and then continued to Phoenix, where they lived with Alice's sister for 6 months before relocating permanently to California. Henry Nakai never operated a trading post again. The family never returned to the reservation. The trading post at Chuska Spring was listed as abandoned by the buyer in early 1958. The merchandise remained on the shelves for years, gradually desiccating or being taken by passing travelers who did not know the history. The building deteriorated. The roof collapsed in the winter of 1966. The gasoline pump rusted. The threshold, which Henry Nakai had replaced after digging beneath it, rotted away. But the door is still standing, and above the door, wedged into the frame where someone placed it after the family left, is a tintype photograph in a small metal frame. The photograph shows the trading post on a sunny day with the gasoline pump gleaming. Standing in front of the post are three figures. The man is barefoot. The woman's face is blurred. The girl is holding a lamb. The girl's face is not Lorraine Nakai's. It is the face of a child who has not been identified. I have seen this photograph. I drove to Chuska Spring in September 1970 and found the building still standing, barely its walls canted inward, its floor covered in broken glass and blown sand. The photograph was above the door, nailed into the frame. I did not touch it. I photographed it with my own camera, and when the film was developed, the frame in which the photograph should have appeared was overexposed white, featureless, a rectangle of glare. The other frames on the roll were normal. The case file is held in the McKinley County Records Annex in Gallup and is classified as unresolved inactive. The turquoise stone remains in evidence. The livestock inspector's report is in the file. The BIA agent's report is in the file. The tintype above the door is still there. I do not intend to return to verify this.